Hello class and welcome to the entrance of my house. Finally this week we're gonna be able to do something that we've been wanting to do for a long time now, which is basically to bring the classroom outside of the classroom, and in this case specifically outside of your screen and my screens, and to basically bring it to Vienna, to the city, and take a walk, an historical walk, to reflect a little bit about movements in Vienna around housing in the last 30 and 40 years, and specifically on issue of squatting and autonomous politics. So basically what we're gonna do, before I get run over by a car, what we're gonna do for the next hour or so is basically taking a long walk around living social spaces and squat and space of political mobilization and migrant protest that either still exist in Vienna or they disappear since. And we're gonna do this by meeting up with Robert Foltin. Robert Foltin is a writer, an author, an activist. He's been kind of involved in autonomous politics, and he will tell us a little bit more about what that means in the case of Vienna since the 1970s, in LGBT and queer activism, in squatting movement, in housing movement. We are at the Ammerlingbels, or however it's pronounced, my German sucks, which you'll read about in the paper that we attached to this video. We're basically in central Vienna, right behind the museum quarter, and we're just gonna go in and have Robert talking to us a little bit about the space.
And I have to talk about the region here. There were a lot of old buildings, all but in the 70s. In the time, a lot of places where the houses pulled down, the old houses and new houses built. But here there were the owning conditions were different. There were a lot of small owners of the houses, and it was relatively come down in the 70s. And there was a group of architects, artists, not a little bit the left-wing scene, not so much, who wanted the buildings here in this district gets not
Destroyed.
yeah. And in summer 1975, they made a summer party which stretched 3 months. Because in summer 1975, although they wanted a district center also as the first one, then ever on other places they blossom up. But it was half accepted, especially that it was clear that it was only through the summer, and they had the problem that there were too little activists, and it broke down in some time. But they were in negotiations with the community, with the city of Vienna, and became in the next years a contract to use it in some form of self-organization. But not really. It was the city of Vienna wanted not to lose control.
Okay.
And it exists since 1978 in a legal way and was widely self-organized, but with problems. It comes out from the artists and architects and left-wing organizations. And the autonomous people or the pre-autonomous people tried to change it in the beginning of the 80s. But it's also now a very important place where we can organize radical events in the relatively small rooms.
All right, so as we leave this space, we're gonna move kind of along the timeline of this trial and error exercise that Robert was talking about, or trial to change, as he calls it. And the next stop is gonna be in Pilgrimgasse, which is not far away from Karlsplatz. We had some weeks ago someone from the city of Vienna visit class, and they always like to tell this story of Red Vienna. You know, Vienna as the city in which social housing is given to people, in which it's easy to get a house, an affordable house. And obviously the story you're telling us is a very different story. It's not a story of a city that is providing housing for everyone. It's not a story necessarily of an inclusive city. What's your take on this narrative of Vienna as Red Vienna?
Yeah, Red Vienna was in the 20s and early 30s. But there are remnants until now. That's in any case clear. It was, I think, in the 70s and 80s more easy to get a flat than in other cities in Europe. I think that are remnants of that Red Vienna. Nevertheless, our argument always was we cannot make collectives, we cannot live in collectives, and not only that we have no place. But a little bit, it is the affordable place, and it was to live in a collective was important for this housing project, for the squatting ideas. And maybe because it was not so hard than in other cities, it is possible that the squatting movement was not so road in other cities. Although in the 90s the social housing was reduced to very small pockets, and they began it a few years ago again. They're speaking about social housing. Although it's not comparable to the Red Vienna.
Like that period. So now from the Rosalila Villa, we are jumping again on the U4 and making our way to Favoriten. And as we do this movement, we're basically moving also from the 1980s to the 1990s as the period we're looking at. And as we will see, one of the changes that will happen in that period is precisely the fact that there'll be a kind of attempt to stop occupying spaces that belong to the city of Vienna. And in this specific case, we're looking at a building very close to our university that was occupied actually, that was owned at the time by the Communist Party. So we learned a little bit about the tensions between the autonomous movement and the Communist Party at the time, and a little bit about the neighborhood that our university moved in. So we'll jump on the subway again and we'll see you there. So we are in Favoriten now, very close to our university, to the space. So what's the space?
In former times, it was a Czech school owned by the Communist Party. There was the big rooms where there was schooling, but it was also some center for the party. So you read Favoritner Arbeiterclub, there's workers club of Favoriten. There were a lot. I have told you that occupations are evicted within hours or days, though there comes the idea from autonomous people to occupy an empty building which is owned by the Communist Party. There were two reformers, Sohn and Silbermeier, in that time, and they signed a contract with them of parts of the buildings. Then a little more orthodox were the leaders of the party. So, but in the right time, it was signed by for a short time, unorthodox leaders. There were troubles in the mid of the 90s because a group which was supported by the Communist Party of Serbian communists goes out and they occupied the space. And there were some discussions about it, but in the end they accepted a sharing with different groups. And there are some kind of, from the communists which are from Serbia also here, as there is the ATIK, that's a Turkish Kurdish organization, together with the autonomous people.
Do you know what is the kind of relationship between a space like this and the neighborhood of Favoriten? Like, as you were saying, like Favoriten is an interesting neighborhood because it's a migrant neighborhood, but at the same time it's like a heavily gentrifying neighborhood where, close to the station, new buildings are coming up. So how is the life of a space like this different from where we were before, which is almost the inner city of Vienna?
Although it's calmed down, I think they try to make Straßenfest,
like a street bar, block party,
to make sympathy in the environment. It's accepted, I would think, although it's sometimes problematic. I forgot, last summer there were some Turkish extremists writing who fought Kurdish women's demonstrations. The women went to the Gara and they also Griffman.
Right, they attacked the
car. There were 3 days of demonstrations, big demonstrations. I were there. There were thousands of sympathizers with the lefts, and there are some radical Turkish youth.
We are basically heading to the 14th district to see this space called Pankatin, which is kind of an example of what was happening in the 2000s. Once again, going back to kind of punk community and punk cultures in the 2000s. So once again, we'll explore a new strategy and a new response to the city of Vienna kind of pushback against occupation. The train is here. So we're gonna jump on and we'll see you at Pankatin in the 14th. Bye.
I always say it looks like the squatted house, but it isn't squatted.
It's true, yes, the aesthetic, but no.
And that is Anthropofascismus. It's especially because thinking about 1934, because the Austrofascists crashed an armed insurrection by social democratic rebels. Now the punks were a group who lived without flat on the Maria-Hilfer-Straße, begging, and there were some troubles because the shop owners threw them away because they disturbed the businesses. So they got politicized and built a group who wanted a punker center in some sense. And their strategy was not to squat a house and stay there, but to squat a house every 2 months and get evicted, but be visible for this. So it sometimes they invented me to make a talk in a fresh squatted house, and it was a real ruin. The police didn't come, so it was very terrible to stay overnight in this house. But the strategy was to symbolically squat houses and in the same time do negotiations. And 2009, I think, they got this house.
All right, so we wanted to ask you a question about a kind of short history of tactics of squatting in Vienna and the changing of those tactics, but also of the police response and the city response over time, given that we've went through a few spaces and each of them seems to have a very or a slightly different story of how it went. So can you tell us something about what tactics people use and what reaction they get?
Partially the tactics was by accident, and but they were thinking about it. I said in the 70s the occupations were to make district centers or communication centers. Then in the beginning of the 80s there were collectives who tried to make the same as in Berlin, to occupy houses to live there, and it doesn't work. But the city of Vienna answered to give projects on the one side, cultural projects, social centers or community centers, and houses also with so-called precarious contracts. Next strategy was to squat the house of the Communist Party. In the 90s we have spoken about it. In the 2000s there was a new squatting movement since 2005, and one of the results, maybe the only result, is the bunker eaten.